Louis XIV's Versailles, 1715, the Sun King was rotting alive. His left foot had turned black, not bruised black like ash. The skin cracked open like overripe fruit, leaking pus and gas that hissed when touched. By morning, his big toe had fallen off the bone. Flies buzzed in the golden bedchamber, not around flowers, but around flesh, the stink sweet, raw, and choking pushed through the velvet curtains, spilled into the marble hallways, and made courtiers gag behind embroidered handkerchiefs. His breath rattled like torn paper. His eyes were open, but not focused. They stared through people at something behind them, or beyond. Beneath the layers of lace and perfume, the most powerful man in Europe was liquefying from the inside. Every hour, his leg climbed closer to the color of rot, then his thigh, then his groin. The air in the room turned yellow. Priests whispered prayers with pinched noses. And yet he was still alive, still issuing orders, still signing decrees with a trembling, black-spotted hand. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. No one would say it aloud, but it moved like a shadow through the palace. Was this divine punishment, or something worse? A curse, poison, treason. They burned his medical records, buried the truth beneath layers of marble and myth for centuries. The world believed Louis XIV died a noble death in his sleep. But that was a lie. And tonight, we're opening the casket. The doors of the Hall of Mirrors flew open. Light, refracted through 100 Venetian panes, danced across gold-trimmed walls and polished marble floors. At the threshold stood a figure so radiant, so impossible, that those in the room forgot to breathe. Louis. He was 23, and in that moment, he did not look like a man. He looked like a myth sculpted from sunlight. His skin shimmered with a warm, golden hue, not powdered natural. His black hair, thick and glossy, fell in carefully orchestrated curls along his shoulders. Eyes like polished sapphire pierced straight through the pomp of protocol, muscles flexed beneath velvet, and his jawline could have been carved by a god of war. The courtiers bowed, not out of duty, but instinct. Some clutched their chests. One young noblewoman collapsed in silence, her face pale, her mouth trembling in awe. The room didn't breathe again until Louis stepped inside. He didn't walk. He arrived. The chamber orchestra stilled. The air grew dense with heat and perfume orange blossom, musk, and something else. Something electric. The smell of fear. Maybe, or desire. Louis didn't speak, not at first. He simply lifted one gloved hand and the room moved, as if the entire court were puppets on a single string. That morning, at sunrise, they had dressed him. 300 nobles waited hours for the chance to hand him a stocking, a boot, a sash. One man wept when he was chosen to tie the king's garter. Another fainted after touching his sleeve. This was not theater. This was worship. And Louis believed it. He had been crowned not just as king, but as embodiment of France itself. He was the center of gravity, and he knew it. Every word he spoke echoed for generations. Every glance became legend. He learned quickly that divinity could be rehearsed, and so he mastered it. He rose at dawn, surrounded by whispers and silk. His body was tended to like a sacred relic. He was perfumed, powdered, dressed by 20 hands. No movement was wasted. No breath was without purpose. And when he moved, oh, how he moved. In the gardens of Versailles, he hunted wild boar on foot, outrunning men half his age. He danced ballet until sunrise, gliding with a grace that humiliated trained performers. He once leapt from the balcony during a masquerade, landed in stride, laughed, and vanished into the maze. He devoured life, 4 meals a day, 3 banquets between. He consumed poetry, politics, and women with the same hunger. He memorized the names, families, and scandals of over 3,000 nobles, then used that knowledge like a blade. He seduced 12 women a month, at least, some queens, some maids, some married, many not. They came to him trembling and left hollow, blessed or ruined depending on how he looked at them the next morning. And his voice, it could be heard from over 150 feet away, crisp and cutting through wind or riot. Foreign ambassadors returned home swearing it was the voice of angels, or devils, or both. But no one ever said human. Inside Versailles, he was worshipped like a living sun. Outside, entire nations shifted beneath his shadow. He dismissed Parliament, declared himself the absolute monarch. "I am the state," he said, and no one laughed. Because they believed it. He constructed Versailles not as a palace, but as a stage. Every corridor, every chandelier, every scent of rosewater in the fountains was part of a script. Nobles vied for the honor of holding his gloves. Ministers fought to light his candle. Even silence had to be rehearsed. And still none of it was enough. There was a hunger behind Louis's perfect eyes, a flicker of something ravenous, something that would not be satisfied by silk or sex or applause. He stood alone in his mirrored hall, surrounded by hundreds, yet no reflection showed the rot slowly blooming beneath his skin. Not yet, not in that light. But it was there. Because no man, not even a sun king, can burn that bright without turning to ash. Beneath the powdered wigs and the choreographed grandeur, something was quietly festering. It began as discomfort, a tightness low in the gut. Louis ignored it. He was too busy hunting, seducing, governing, performing. He dismissed the heaviness in his abdomen as indigestion, just another consequence of indulgence. But it didn't pass. By dusk, his breath carried an odor, something metallic, like rusted coins left in milk. Courtiers flinched but said nothing. The room was too gilded for truth. Louis chewed mint leaves until his gums burned. He laced his handkerchiefs with jasmine and orange blossom. He believed, or pretended to believe, that the smell came from others, lesser men. He didn't notice the way people angled their faces away when he spoke. By his 35th year, he required enemas daily, sometimes twice, sometimes more, behind closed doors. He moaned softly as silver tubes filled his bowels with cold lavender water. The servants tasked with the ritual moved like ghosts, never looking him in the eyes, never speaking. Still, Louis emerged from his chambers with his shoulders high, his scent masked in Arabian musk, his cheeks caked with powdered coral. No one could see the broken capillaries beneath the rouge, or the pustules that grew along his jawline, hidden beneath a paste of white lard and vinegar. When he smiled, his lips cracked, they bled. But he smiled anyway. The world expected beauty. And then came the rash. It started on his chest, a red smear, the shape of a coin, which spread like ink in water. Doctors whispered theories, bad humors, spoiled blood, divine punishment. They bled him. They purged him. They leached his skin until he shivered in his sheets, cold and pale, but still royal. He stopped bathing altogether. Not that he had ever truly bathed. Louis believed water weakened the soul, opened the flesh to evil spirits. He permitted only partial washings, hands, face, occasionally his feet. The rest of him festered in linen and lace. Servants noted the stains, yellow at first, then brown, then streaked with black. Still, Versailles continued its rituals, lever at dawn, banquets by candlelight, dances that ended at sunrise. And Louis, drenched in scent, stitched into silks, moved among his people like a star clinging to its last light. But the walls were beginning to close in. Foreign dignitaries left the meetings early. Some requested that windows remain open, even in winter. They claimed it was for health. Everyone knew it was for the smell. Louis didn't eat as he once had. The joy of gluttony dulled into obligation. He would push food around his plate, nod politely, and leave early to sit in solitude, legs apart, spine stiff, the air around him thick with pain and perfume. And yet he refused to show weakness. He refused to limp. Even when one leg ached with fire, he refused to groan. Even when standing caused him to clench the arms of his gilded chair so hard his knuckles went white, he still danced, though slower, shorter, surrounded by more applause than movement. In private, he would stare into mirrors long after the candles burned low. He'd trace the lines beneath his eyes, the sag at the corners of his mouth. He would lift his chin and try to find the man the world still believed in. But even the glass couldn't lie forever. One morning, the Queen's chambermaid reported finding a trail, brown, wet, and clinging to the corridor rug. It led from the king's apartments to the chapel. She followed it to the pew where Louis had prayed the night before. The velvet cushion was soaked through. She was paid to say nothing. The rug was burned, the cushion replaced. Still, the rumors began. They said the king was being eaten alive, that something inside him was turning to poison, that his beauty had come at a cost, and now the debt was being collected. Some blamed foreign witches, others, sin. A few whispered of divine justice. But no one dared say it to his face. Because Louis still looked down from balconies like a god surveying his dominion. He still raised his scepter, and men bowed low enough to kiss the floor. His eyes still glowed in candlelight, bright and cold, like moons in eclipse. And beneath it all, beneath the brocade, beneath the powder and cologne, his body continued its quiet rebellion. The rot was spreading, slowly, steadily. And no one, not even the king, could stop it. A chill settled over Versailles in January. The marble corridors whispered with quiet dread. It began when Louis finally admitted to pain, not pride, but pure agony searing low in his rear. He shifted uncomfortably in his gilded chair during council, hands pressed to his leg. He clenched his teeth, nodded as ministers spoke, and refused to halt the meeting. That night, he lay in his bedchamber. The servants stood at rigid attention, their eyes glancing toward his silhouette beneath velvet curtains. Louis did not move. He stared upward, jaw clenched, as a single bead of sweat slid down his spine. A slow symphony of muffled moans escaped behind the silk walls. Days passed. The pain grew. His flesh swelled beneath the surface, pulsing with heat. When he shifted his weight, a deep crack echoed a sound thick and wet, as if bone had broken. Yet Louis remained erect in public, regal and unyielding. Doctors circled him like vultures. Their voices were hushed, trembling with equal parts fear and fascination. They probed him with hands gloved in silk, but beneath the gloves, their palms shook. Silver instruments curved, cold, unforgiving were prepared. Fagin recommended enemas, but this was worse. Behind closed doors, servants held him down. He breathed through gritted teeth as tubes were forced into him. His body jerked, his eyes squeezed shut. Only his knuckles creased white. When the cold liquid hit bone, he gasped. His body convulsed. They held him. They pressed soft cloths to his mouth to stifle the scream, and then still he remained king. Outside his chamber, Versailles continued. Banquets rang with laughter. Chambermaids dusted candelabras. But the air around the king's quarters was heavy with something else, the faint, sour stench of illness. Inside, Louis sat propped on silk-lined pillows. The bulge along his backside resembled an inflamed drum. It throbbed. The skin stretched tight and red, pulsing like a heartbeat. He could not sit. He could not stand. But he refused to lie down. The first incision came without warning. Louis's surgeon, Charles-François Félix, entered silently, carrying a tray of blades so cold they steamed against his breath. No anesthesia, no opium. Louis stared at the steel in Félix's hand, lips parting half defiance, half dread. He bit a wooden rod, knuckles aflame. The first cut drew out a rush of hot pus, green and radiant like oil, catching fire. The smell erupted acrid, sulfuric, rotten. The stench slammed into his nostrils, into his lungs, into his tongue. He retched, but did not cry out. Félix worked. Hours passed. Bright daylight faded to candle glow. Workers in the hall outside shifted positions, murmuring. Félix sliced with careful precision, clearing away necrotic tissue, edging closer to living flesh. Louis stayed still. Grit strained every sinew in his neck. At one point, his vision blurred. He saw his own blood spill onto Félix's sleeve. The red turned black. He heard the dripping sound wet, hollow, slowing to a watery trickle. He tasted copper. He felt his body betray him with every pulse. When it ended, Louis sat upright, rocked only by breathing. The wound glistened a cavern beneath his skin now open to the world. Félix whispered something in Latin. Louis nodded once, eyes glassy. They bandaged him. The smell lingered. The gap across the tissue was raw and red, too large. It would not heal easily. 2 more surgeries followed in quick succession. Each time, Louis's eyes grew darker with exhaustion. Under torchlight, the king's face changed, cheeks hollowed, skin waxen, voice thin. He spoke rarely. He lay in bed most days, listening to the palace beyond echo with life he no longer felt part of. Through this, nobles delivered petitions at his bedside. They bowed low. They kissed the ground. They kissed his hand. They recoiled from his scent, but kept their faces composed, covered by perfumed handkerchiefs. His body betrayed him. The abscess created a permanent channel. Feces and pus leaked without warning. The linen stained. The servants changed bedsheets so often that the threadbare cloth wore thin. The scent went through masks, through doors, through marble hallways. Courtiers pretended not to notice, but they spoke in half sentences, glancing at each other's noses, drawing breath only after distance. Louis listened. He heard whispers. He felt eyes shift to their feet when he entered a room, yet he refused to yield. He took to cloistered dinners, masked himself heavily, moved in shadows. But still, the drumbeat of his flesh drifting apart throbbed under robes and lace. One evening, he sat in a private alcove. The wax in the chandelier dripped to the table. He watched it fall, molten white, onto a mound of scented petals. The wax sizzled and blackened. He touched it with a fingertip and recoiled. The wax felt alive, hot, sticky, repulsive. He looked down at his own fingers, stained with amber. He licked one thumb. It tasted sweet. He felt bile rise. He closed his eyes. A mirror, half hidden, caught the reflection of figure and shadow, hunched, drawn, and no longer glowing. The silken powder barely covered the hollows beneath his eyes. He saw the king he used to be, the hunter, the dancer, the god among men. And he saw the body that would betray him. He whispered to no one. Not yet. He whispered again. Hold on. But beneath the silk and the marble and the perfumed air beneath the spectacle of Versailles, the king had already begun to rot. The surgeries were over. The wound was open, and from that wound, something began to emerge that no crown could hide. Each morning, Louis sat upright, bathed not in sunlight, but in the murky haze of perfumed smoke. Attendants burned juniper, clove, myrrh, anything to smother the stench. The palace reeked of incense and infection. But nothing could mask the truth. The abscess had left behind a passage, a permanent fistula, leaking a blend of pus and feces slowly, constantly, without mercy. Linen could not contain it. Silk absorbed it. Every chair he touched had to be burned. Every room he entered had to be emptied, aired, and silently prayed over. Still, he ruled. He gave orders with a trembling voice, his tone distant and thin. He raised his hand in blessing, though it now bore lesions between the knuckles. The courtiers knelt as before, kissed his hand, then staggered back, pale-faced, gasping for air. He was bloating. His legs, once sculpted from flesh and rhythm, swelled into pale trunks of meat. His belly strained against its buttons. His neck thickened. His breath rasped. His frame grew heavier than the throne itself could hold. The old gilded chair cracked beneath him. A new throne was built, then another, each one larger, reinforced with iron beneath the velvet. Louis no longer hunted. He no longer danced. His limbs ached with every movement, yet every morning, the ritual continued. The lever, the royal dressing, 4 men to lift him, 2 more to clean the sheets, 1 to perfume the room before anyone else dared enter. They worked in silence. No one spoke of the stains, of the maggots once found in the bed sheets, of the blood on the slippers. The king's chambers had become a shrine of rot, tended with trembling reverence. Still, guests arrived, diplomats, cardinals, foreign royalty, all forced to face what remained of the Sun King. Some pretended not to notice, others made excuses. Some requested audiences in the gardens, far from the suffocating chamber where time and flesh were unraveling. And Louis, he noticed everything. He watched them hold their breath. He watched them sweat in the winter air. He knew why some bowed too fast, why others avoided his eyes. He watched the mirrors in his chamber quietly disappear, one by one. Still, he held court. Still, he signed decrees. Still, He pretended not to hear when a servant gagged behind a curtain. But the worst came not with the stench, not with the swelling, not even with the flies. It came with the teeth. In 1693, Dr. Dubois insisted on dental surgery. Louis, already weak, agreed. The doctor, ill-trained and arrogant, removed not one or two, but every single tooth in the king's mouth. No anesthetic, no antiseptic, just forceps, cloth, and blood. The king screamed. The sound echoed across the marble floors, down the spiral staircases, into the gallery of gods. The extractions tore his palate, shattered part of his jaw. The wound opened a hole between his mouth and nasal cavity. From then on, every meal was a torment. Wine spilled from his nose. Bread came out in crumbs. He could no longer chew, could barely speak. His once commanding voice collapsed into a wheeze, muffled by cloths and saliva. He drooled in public. He coughed into his lap. He swallowed pain like air. And still he ruled. He wore fur-lined cloaks in summer, not from cold, but to absorb the moisture. His attendants no longer stood close. Ministers addressed him from a distance. Some used intermediaries, whispering to secretaries who then spoke aloud in the king's direction. Versailles began to rot around him. Florists replaced bouquets every 2 hours. Glaziers opened windows, even in freezing winds. The scent of decay had etched itself into the palace stones. Louis would sit at his writing desk for hours. His hands trembled, his quill scratched unevenly, but he refused help. He refused pity. One night, a valet found him slumped in a chair, face pale, lips trembling. A stain had spread across the cushion beneath him, dark, foul, alive. The king looked up, his eyes red, and simply said, "Change nothing." They never would, because beneath the silk, the incense, and the crowns, they all saw the same truth. Louis XIV was no longer a man. He was a body, a leaking, wheezing, bloated monument to a myth that had outlived its flesh. And yet he endured, because even a god must rot on his throne before the people dare to bury him. The king was decomposing, but Versailles would not allow it. Not openly. The palace adapted, like an organism mutating to protect its heart. New rules emerged silent at first, then codified in whispers, gestures, and silk. They called it the Protocol of Proximity. A ribbon system was introduced, discreet, color-coded, tied to the lapels of those closest to the king. White meant approach was allowed with scented gloves and perfumed cloth pressed beneath the nose. Red signaled pain, no audience, no noise. Black meant the king's condition had worsened drastically. Approach only if summoned, and only with incense. Even his breath had to be choreographed. Chairs were replaced every fortnight. Fresh flowers arrived every 2 hours, regardless of season. Fountains in the garden were adjusted to play louder, to drown out the coughing, the wet gasps, the strange, choking groans that rose behind closed doors. Louis still rose for lever each morning, but the ritual had changed. He no longer stood before the court. He was propped up by cushions, half-dressed, separated by a curtain of lace and lavender smoke. Only the highest-ranked nobles were allowed to glimpse him, and even they were warned not to stare for long. A new generation of courtiers had never seen the king walk. To them, he was a voice behind velvet, a silhouette framed in incense, a crown resting on pillows embroidered with blood. Every evening, before cousure, servants applied ointments to the fistula, powdered his cheeks until the skin cracked beneath the weight. 2 carried buckets. 1 changed the cloth lining of his undergarments. 1 held a candle, always facing away. And no one spoke. Because to speak of the king's condition was to speak of France itself unraveling. So instead they performed, when the king entered a room, everyone stood, no matter the stench, no matter the sound of liquid soaking the hem of his robes. Nobles bowed until their knees ached. Ministers smiled through clenched teeth. Dancers performed in corridors layered with scented ash. To falter to gag, to step back, to turn the face was treason of the body. Versailles became a cathedral of denial. Behind every gesture, a system. Behind every silence, a strategy. Dozens of servants trained only to control airflow windows opened at precise angles. perfumes released at precise intervals. Incense swung in rhythm like holy offerings. The king's bedchamber became a sealed chamber, wood-paneled, lined with fabric soaked in rosewater, machinery installed to circulate air, slowly, softly, like the breath of a dying god. Foreign diplomats were carefully stage-managed. If they insisted on meeting the king, they were seated far away, on low stools, backs to the light. Conversations were brief, translated twice, once by mouth, once by paper, so that the king might avoid speaking. Some refused altogether, some feigned illness, others sent envoys in their place. Rumors spread beyond the palace walls, that the Sun King was no longer flesh, that his bones were soaked in poison, that he had died years ago, and a decaying puppet ruled in his place. The Spanish ambassador wrote, "I met him once. I could not speak. His breath took mine away not by majesty, but by scent." Still, the letters from Versailles denied everything. The king is strong, the king is radiant, the king governs with the wisdom of 10 men. No mention of ulcers, of fecal seepage, of toothless silence or splintered jaw. All mirrors were removed from the king's private quarters. He had stopped looking long ago. His reflection was no longer his ally. It was his executioner. He spent hours now staring at the ceiling, listening, feeling the slow drip of liquid between his thighs, the occasional flutter of flies, like distant violins. He would close his eyes and remember the hall of mirrors, the applause, the scent of fresh lilies, not sour milk, the thrill of stepping into a room and watching grown men fall to their knees. He had ruled for more than 5 decades. He had outlived his rivals, crushed rebellions, built cities, crafted laws, and now he was held together by linen and illusion. But Versailles would not let him die in disgrace. So they rewrote the script. A new form of ceremony was invented, wheeled audiences. The king no longer walked to the throne. The throne came to him, behind curtains, lit only by candlelight, surrounded by courtiers already trained not to breathe too deeply. They created distance. They built silence. They composed Versailles into a portrait fixed, eternal, and odorless. But nothing could stop the truth from seeping through. At night, the guards at his door took turns, not out of fatigue but to escape the smell. They returned with red-rimmed eyes, scarves soaked in vinegar, mouths shut tight. And in the middle of it all sat Louis, breathing, leaking, watching. The Sun King was now a shrine of flesh, worshipped not for glory, but because the alternative was unthinkable. What happens when the man becomes more myth than body? Versailles had no answer. So it danced, and sprayed perfume, and waited. August 1715. Versailles stilled. The wind slowed. The air grew thick, as if the palace itself was holding its breath. Louis had stopped walking. He had stopped standing. Now he barely moved. Something was happening to his leg. A small pain at first deep, needling, crawling under the skin like a worm burrowing upward. He mentioned it once, just once. By morning, the skin above his foot had turned the color of ashes. Physicians swarmed. They touched, prodded, whispered. No one dared say the word, not yet. But all of them knew. Gangrene. By the second day, the odor could not be denied, even with smoke, even with wine and crushed lilacs boiled in silver pots. The infection moved upward silent, ruthless, blackening the flesh inch by inch. He refused the amputation. He refused morphine. He refused to let them see him fall. Instead, he dictated letters. He signed military orders with a hand that shook so violently it blurred the ink. He asked to be shaved and perfumed. He ordered the flowers changed hourly. But his body betrayed him. The legs swelled until the skin split open in 3 places. The calf wept. The kneecap hardened. The toes curled inward like dried leaves. On the 5th day, his big toe fell off. It dropped to the floor with a soft, wet sound. The physician flinched. Louis stared at the spot, then looked away. No words. No alarm. Only silence. And still he ruled. Every breath now came with a gurgle. His mouth was packed with cloth to absorb the leaking saliva. When he spoke, it came in fragments like wind pushing through broken glass. One night, he asked to see the stars. They opened the windows. The summer air drifted in, soft and warm, carrying with it the scent of roses and rot. He looked out for hours, eyes unblinking, as if waiting for something, as if listening for the sound of judgment. By the seventh day, his thigh turned black. The infection climbed toward his groin, toward his belly. He sweated constantly. His sheets had to be changed every 2 hours. The skin along his side had blistered and split, revealing streaks of raw tissue beneath. His chest heaved. Priests came and went, candles burned down to wax puddles. Choirs sang from the chapel, 3 rooms away, voices trembling, never quite reaching his ears. The final hours blurred. He was awake, then not, then lucid, then gone again. He muttered things they didn't understand, names long dead, words from childhood, lines from poetry he had once recited with thunder, now just breathless syllables sliding across cracked lips. And then, on the 1st of September, he stopped. No gasp, no cry. Just a long, drawn-out exhale, quiet, hollow. The king had died. Or rather, his body had surrendered. But death did not bring peace. Within minutes, the rot accelerated. His body inflated, swollen with trapped gas, stretched tight like overripe fruit. The skin shifted from gray to green. A low creaking echoed through the room as his chest began to lift unnaturally. Rising with pressure, they moved fast. The embalmers arrived with knives and linen in urgency. But the corpse was already coming apart. When they cut him open, the room filled with a scent so foul that 2 assistants vomited into their sleeves. His stomach was thick with parasites, worms coiled like wet rope. His throat had turned black, the tongue swollen and slick. The flesh inside his left leg was no longer flesh, it was soup. They stuffed him with spices, cloves, cinnamon, myrrh, anything to stall the collapse. The coffin was sealed within hours, lead-lined, double-walled, bolted shut. Even still it hissed. Gas built up, the seams groaned, fluid leaked from the corners. They had to wrap the coffin in thick cloth and scatter rose petals across the marble floor beneath it. He had reigned 72 years. He had outlived everyone. And now he stank of everything he had denied. Decay. Mortality. Time. The Sun King had not burned out. He had rotted, inch by inch, breath by breath, until the god behind the curtain became what all men become. Meat, silence, and memory. The coffin stood in the crypt, cold, sealed, heavy with lead. But they could still smell him. The scent had settled into the walls, into the stone, into the hands of every man who touched his flesh. It clung to the fabric of Versailles, no matter how many tapestries were changed, no matter how many rooms were scrubbed or fumigated or drowned in perfume. They burned the bed linens, tore up the floorboards, removed the throne, and buried it in a vault. And still there were places, corners, shadows where the air trembled, rancid, sweet, like spoiled honey. The body of Louis XIV decomposed so rapidly that by the time they attempted the embalming, it had already begun to collapse in on itself. His internal organs, once thought to hold divine wisdom, oozed from his chest in steaming ribbons of bile and blood. They didn't record the details, not in public. The official bulletin stated, the king passed peacefully, surrounded by prayer. But no one spoke of the toe that fell off, of the worms, of the blackened jaw, of the puddle that spread beneath his coffin before the funeral was over. The autopsy report was hidden, burned. The surgical notes vanished. Fagin's journals disappeared. Felix, the surgeon, was paid and silenced. They rewrote him in marble. Versailles reopened. The court bowed to the next monarch. The curtains were changed. The mirrors returned. And France forgot. But some nights, long after the music had ended and the fires had burned low, the guards at the palace gate swore they could still smell something faint, putrid, impossible, drifting through the halls like a secret too stubborn to die. Louis XIV, the Sun King. He ruled for 72 years, conquered nations, reigned as a god. And in the end, he left behind nothing but smoke, and a smell that no crown could ever bury. Even now, if you stand beneath the dome at Saint Denis, lean close, and breathe, you might still catch it.